Pleasure to see so many people dialing in. My name is Ed. I'm here to host this call. I'm a member of the Threshold team, and we're going to be getting started in a few minutes. As you can see, I'm joined by another member of the team. This is Nick Tuppen, CEO of Threshold Sports. How are you doing, Nick?
Hey guys, all very well.
Nick, this is actually Nick's screen that we're seeing. So Nick is going to be leading from the front today and actually taking part in the group ride. We're also joined by Andy Cook. Andy is our route director on RAB. How are you doing, Andy?
All good, thanks, Ed. Sorry, I'm not on my bike tonight, but hopefully I'll be able to offer some words of advice and wisdom during the training ride tonight.
It's great to have you. I'm just looking through the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from. We've had people from sunny Scotland, from Essex, from Milton Keynes, Northern Ireland. I've seen in the Rouvy sign up that we've got people from as far afield as America. We've got someone from Trinidad, South Africa. Let us know where you're dialing in from. With just under 2 minutes to go, AJ's here from Watopia. That's good to see. With just under 2 minutes to go, just make sure a couple of admin checks. Make sure your laptop or your iPad, whatever you're using to join today, is plugged in. You don't want to drop out of the ride midway. Grab a bottle of water if you need one. And if you're using a fan to simulate those Glenshee headwinds, then maybe crank it up to 11. Also joining us is Clemmy. Clemmy is in the chat. Clemmy is another member of the team here at Threshold. So if you've got any issues with getting into Rouvy or anything like that, Clemmy is here to help you out. But we are about a minute out from starting. This countdown is pretty exciting.
Ed, I saw one question pop up around etiquette.
Yeah.
On Rouvy and on these group rides. Always good to see someone asking about etiquette rather than just disappearing off into the distance. It's always a good sign. But in reality, as with RAB, we'll have people of lots of different speeds. We've got a chance, if you want to stretch your legs ahead. You know, the ride will have people of different speeds and different groups. We'll talk a bit about the role of the chaperones, but you'll see with various people with chaperones, RAB chaperone names next to them. But really, this is about getting comfortable on the platform, on the ride. So if you want to stretch your legs, that's fine. There'll be no prizes for first place. Equally, don't feel bad if you need to stop off, stretch your legs. Lots of people will be new to this, but that's why we're trying to set it up in a supportive environment on Babble Ride.
Absolutely. This is also a drafting legal event. You can actually draft on Rouvy. All right, here we go. Countdown's counting down. And off we go. God, it's quite exciting to see so many people out on the course. You'll notice that everyone is clad in our fantastic virtual Babble Ride Across Britain jersey, which looks absolutely brilliant on there. So as we're pedaling away, I'm going to be talking to you guys about some of the finer details of RAB. For those of the people who are joining who perhaps are new to the event, perhaps haven't ridden it before, Nick, as you're pedaling away and between snatched breaths, maybe you could just give us a bit of a lowdown on what RAB is, as we call it, what the Babble Ride Across Britain is.
Yeah, so Babble Ride Across Britain set up back in 2008 with the simple idea of how can we let more people have the experience of riding Land's End on a groats. If you kind of grew up in the UK, this kind of mythical idea of riding from one end of the country to the other is kind of cemented in your brain at some stage of life and has this niggling habit of not disappearing, which is probably why we end up with quite a few people on the ride each year. But in its simplest form, you're riding from the very southwestern tip of Cornwall to the northeastern tip of Scotland. And Babble Ride Across Britain was created to try and do that with more scale and more support than you can get anywhere else. So it's effectively enabling more people to have that experience of riding from end to end of the country.
Yeah, and speaking of scale and support, we have to take a moment to thank our title sponsors, Babble. Babble are a cloud computing company. They're the best in the business, and like us, they really believe in the power of experiences like the Ride Across Britain to change people's lives. And to put it bluntly, this event just wouldn't happen without them. So we're super grateful to have them along. It's probably worth taking a moment, Nick, to explain what we're actually looking at here. So this is Rouvy. Could you, in a nutshell, kind of describe what Rouvy is?
Yeah. So the platform itself, those of you who are kind of, even if you're relatively new to cycling, it doesn't take long to find out about virtual cycling platforms. They've been going for quite a few years now, and there's a whole range of different ones. Zwift is the kind of the most prolific with the most people riding on it. And then you've got other ones like Rouvy, which uses a kind of augmented reality system, and various others which you can pick and choose from, which tend to come and go. The reason we chose Rouvy, and actually the reason when we started looking at doing a virtual version of Babble Ride, the idea is that we inspire people to take on the actual thing. Because as much as it is fun riding in a shed in a virtual version of Glenshee, there'll be people on this ride now this will be triggering memories, mostly positive, some emotional, some difficult, but there'll be people who've done the ride before where this just takes them straight back to that feeling of riding along this route. And actually this is the platform, and we chose Rouvy because we can recreate and give people a taster of some of that magic, because you can film all the sections. So this section up towards Glenshee, and we filmed all the highlights of it when the roads were clearer during 2020. So we can kind of parcel up and give people a chance to ride on these different sections, kind of in their Babble Ride kit, and hopefully that either convinces them they should do it for real, and actually join in the whole 9-day experience, or if they're already signed up, it gets them better prepared. So when they do hit the hills of Scotland or Devon or Cornwall, or they're kind of day 3, day 4, the legs are a bit tired, they've got the confidence and the fitness to kind of ride through and really enjoy it.
Yeah. Speaking of fitness, you're doing a fantastic job of holding it together as you climb.
I'm actually done now. So we did agree that I'd do the first kind of couple of minutes before handing over to Andy.
Absolutely. Well, let's turn to Andy, because the section we're riding today, this is about a 10-kilometer section of a route called Glenshee, also known as the Cairnwell Pass. It's actually the highest main road in the UK. It hits a height of 670 meters, or 2,200 feet. And at the top of it, which we'll see later on in the climb, is Glenshee Ski Centre, which is one of the oldest ski centres in Scotland, one of the only places you can ski in the UK. I was digging into some of the stats about this route, Andy, and there's a bit of a myth going around that it hits a 33% gradient, which sounds absolutely nightmarish. I checked that and it doesn't, but it does hit 17%, which is still pretty challenging. So Andy, as the route director for RAB, you've ridden, many of the UK's greatest climbs, and I'm sure many of the greatest climbs in the world. Where does Glenshee kind of sit for you in terms of those highlights?
It's a great question, that is, Ed, because it's one of those climbs, and you're seeing it in all its glory right now on the screen. Yeah. It's a beautiful climb, and you get lulled into this sort of false sense when you're riding. I've done it a couple of times myself during RAB, and it just ramps up. You talked about that 17% bit at the top, and it just gets progressively tougher. And then the last time we did it, we had this almighty headwind, which people have been joking about on the chat groups. But it's beautiful. It's a stunning part of the world, but it's not a climb that should be underestimated. You do need to be prepared. It's a long, steady, gradual drag, which you're riding on at the moment. There's a couple of little digs in it just to get out the saddle and get over, but then you get onto the steep bit towards the top, and that you need to save a little bit in the tank to get that bit completed.
I mean, and speaking of preparing for the real thing, one of the benefits of Rouvy is you can obviously see that elevation profile looming out in front of you, and actually we can see, compared to where Nick is, you can see where various people are out on the course, which is really cool. The section we're riding today, as I say, it's about 10 kilometers, about 6 miles long, and manages to pack about 350 meters or 1,100 feet into that, which is steep by any standards. But if we zoom out a little bit, it's actually just a section from the middle of stage 7 of the full Babble Ride Across Britain. This is a 112-mile stage, so it's on the longer end for RAB, but it stretches from Hopetoun House, which is just outside Edinburgh, to Bellerbeg, which sits between Inverness and Aberdeen. So you really go through the heart of Scotland. And it's really, as many of the stages are on RAB, it's really a bucket list ride. You start the day crossing the Forth Bridge, which is kind of a bucket list item in and of itself, heading through the Grampian Mountains where we are now and into Cairngorms National Park, where of course you start climbing Glenshee. And then on the way down, you take a view of Braemar Castle before you arrive near Strathdon. that's kind of the tick list exercise of the route itself. But Tups, having ridden Rab yourself back in the day, where does sort of stage 7 fit in terms of how people are feeling, on their Rab journey?
I mean, it varies. People's experiences of Rab are very, very different every year. Each year is totally different as well, depending on weather and all kinds of things. But it's undeniable that the later sections, from kind of when you head north from Carlisle, those 4 Scottish stages, the landscape tends to kind of open up. You've got 6 days under your belt, and depending how you're feeling and how you feel about some of these more dramatic days, you have people who really begin to enjoy the ride in those stages and kind of embrace the challenges and the kind of the weather and the scale of it. Often people think of day 7 and day 8 as these real focal points for their training. And strangely, even though they're the days that often people kind of worry about potentially or kind of fixate upon, it's often when we have some of the best riding, the best camaraderie, the best kind of atmosphere in base camp at the finish, because it's often one of these moments where people have been thinking about it. So when you do climb over Glenshee, you go past Balmoral, you're over to Strathdon, or we've got the Lect and stuff like this, which we can set up, or we are setting up on Rouvy. Those last few days feel like big strides towards the finish line. So I'd say the majority of people, they're pretty monumental experiences on the bike. Some people sail through and kind of ride into shape. Some people are digging really, really deep on these stages, but yeah, they're kind of experience matches the landscape in terms of the sense of achievement.
Yeah, 100%. Bill in the chat says he was feeling pretty drained on day 7 back in 2019, which I think is probably putting it mildly.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't taken part in Rab myself, but I was lucky enough to ride Land's End to John O'Groats in 2017 just on my own. And it is interesting the discord you pointed out between the climb that's coming up in your head, or the day that's coming up in your head, and then the reality of actually conquering it. And it's usually the case that the former is scarier than the latter. The reality of it is, it's, what's that phrase? It's a hill, get over it. And often you find that people do.
Yeah.
I
mean, Andy, you've ridden Rab countless times, and your team of chaperones. Your chaperones get a kind of inside view on the journey that people go on. Like, what days or stages or phases do you think people go through?
I think
chaperones help.
Yeah, I think you're bang on, touch with what you've just described. But I also think the chaperone's role is kind of threefold. There's kind of the guys who want to just bash on at the front, so they're there to sort of make sure that's disciplined riding and doesn't sort of cause us any undue worries in terms of making sure that we're riding in accordance with the highway code, etc. But the most important aspect of their job is to look after people and to encourage people. And so there'll be a significant number, and there's a few here today that are riding, that'll be riding at the back. So the first couple of days, as I've said many times when we're in Cornwall, completely different terrain to what you're looking at on the screen now. Short, sharp climbing. People have to get settled in. But as you rightly point out, by the time we get to Scotland, you can kind of feel that you're going to make it to the finish, however tired you might be. So there's a real sort of sense of achievement when you're getting over these massive climbs. They're just a steadier climb. So the chaperone's job really at this point is very much about encouragement, but not just the chaperones, because what you tend to find is that, as you said earlier, the camaraderie amongst riders to help each other and to make sure that everybody's looking out for you. It's not a bike race. We're not in a bike race. We're many people completing it for charity, and it's kind of that real sort of team spirit that's fostered on this ride. And I think that's I've done every single one, as you know, and for me that's the biggest bonus for this ride, and the way that you pull everyone together, and we all get back and have a beer in the evening, and everyone's euphoric generally from what they've achieved during the day. And these climbs and what you're doing up in Scotland is just the icing on the cake for me.
Big shout out to Nathan for calling out that car before it came. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Good chaperone skills.
Absolutely. Yeah. Do let us know in the comments if you've ridden Glenshee yourself in person and taken it on either as part of RAB or on your own.
They'll be far more technologically advanced than me than if they're able to text whilst climbing up a large mountain with various screens plugged in. Hats off to anyone who's remotely able to do that.
Andy, you touched on, I mean, we're having perfect blue sky weather here today, but you've touched on the challenges that this particular day has posed weather-wise. More broadly, with Ride Across Britain, taking place in September, how much is weather a factor on the course, and what should people be thinking about when it comes to getting through the weather?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ed. The thing is, we're riding in Great Britain. It's not renowned for being particularly dry at all times. Having said that, we have had some great RABs where we haven't had to get our rain capes out, but you should always be prepared. You talked about the height we're going to is 670 meters. I mean, that's pretty high, and if you're not dressed accordingly, you can really suffer. And what you need to be is as prepared as possible. You wouldn't go and climb, I don't know, Everest if you hadn't trained or prepared or were wearing the right kit. And it's exactly the same here. We have had people turn up in the past who are not wearing base layers, haven't got gloves, haven't got arm warmers, gilets, rain jackets. And you need to be able to have access to those sorts of things just in case. We will, every evening I'll normally do a safety brief for the following day's ride, and we'll always give a weather warning. But as you know, we're in the Highlands here. It can change so quickly. So it's always important to make sure you are prepared. And of course, training, going out in the winter. There are people that are new to cycling that assume that it's always going to be bright and sunny. That's why riding in the winter outside can prepare you for these sorts of conditions. So making sure you're out in the cold and the wet and the miserable. And hopefully, when you get to the summer in September, we're going to have an Indian summer and it'll be beautiful blue skies, just like you're seeing on the screen today.
I think you're right, Andy. That idea of virtual training complementing training in the real world. I mean, there are people who kind of fall in love with virtual training and never really kind of dust off their actual bike again, which is great because there are some amazing platforms like this. You can ride all over the world on Rouvy if you so choose. But I think this is a complement to those skills you get dodging potholes, having actual cars that you have to go around, understanding what a headwind feels like, understanding that terrain covers are slippery, all these things you learn with miles on the road. So this is very much in combination with the real life riding, which everyone needs to get out there and experience and also enjoy. You don't have. One of the things I enjoyed when I was riding in 2017 is I explored more routes all over the UK in preparation, whether it be kind of near where I lived, or if I was going away for the weekend, I'd kind of pack the bike, get dropped off 30, 40, 50 miles away from where you end up and kind of ride all these different sections. So you learn the ride itself, you see loads of the country, but actually the preparation, you see even more of it in the training months, which is part of the reason it lures people back in.
Yeah, I think to back that up, Tups, I think it's very important. I mean, it's without a doubt, training indoors gives you much more bang for your buck in terms of improvement and especially if you're doing specific workouts. But as you've just rightly pointed out, there's no substitute for getting out on the road. We organise quite a lot of bike races, and recent years there's been lots of people that are very, very, very strong, massive power outputs, but they can't ride a bike for toffee because they can't go around corners, or as you've just pointed out, the drain cover's slippery or something daft like that. So it is absolutely something that needs to be considered and make sure that it does complement the getting out and riding your bike and the outside as much as we can.
Well, speaking of that, Andy, you put together our training plans, which people can find on the Rider Forum on our website if they're thinking of preparing for RAB. Training for an event that's 9 days long and just under 1,000 miles, it kind of takes a long time. So for people who are taking on RAB next year or thinking about it, what should they be sort of focusing on around now at the darkest point of winter here in 2023?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ed. The big what we tend to find is that there's riders that take part in this event that perhaps have very limited cycling experience, but they might well have a very well developed engine, as we call it,
Right.
in the heart and lungs. So their cardiovascular system from perhaps another endurance sport. So it might be running, it might be rowing, it might be swimming, and so it's about technique for those sorts of people. So there's this balance, and those plans are obviously very, very generic, because if people want specific training, then they perhaps need to get a personal coach, but they're generic for a reason. So the main focus is on going out and getting some miles under your belt, because you build up a base. It's fairly straightforward. If you think about a pyramid, you're talking about building up a big load of mileage in the winter, and then in the springtime, you can start to do some specific efforts to build strength and speed. That's a very, very basic premise to training. Adaptation, you need to make sure you're recovering. You mustn't, if you miss sessions, you mustn't then try and catch up and overdo it. There's a lot of sort of advice out there, and lots of other training plans and programs that people will follow, but generally they will be following that similar sort of advice. The opportunity to practice your nutritional strategies as well, try out your equipment, try out your kit. There's so many things that you can do to get yourself ready for what is a pretty phenomenal challenge, as Tups alluded to at the start. The key thing is, if you're prepared, you'll enjoy it. And I use the phrase often, enjoy rather than endure. And another phrase I use quite frequently is to ride at a consistent pace when you're training, and when you're on the ride itself, that's comfortably hard, not hardly comfortable. And that would be the sort of intensity that you can maintain pretty much, hopefully, all day long.
I think it's one of the reasons why we chose this route as an intro to virtual RAV, because this first section we're going along, you have a few moments where, if you're on a kind of smart turbo train, it starts getting a little bit tougher as you go up and down, then you freewheel for a bit, but you can see the road beginning to ramp up in the distance. And this idea of, there will be bits where you, unless you're one of the chaperones or an exceptional athlete, you're never going to chat all the way up there. I'm just giving you some forewarning. I'm just going to really go.
I've got a couple of very difficult questions for you. So I'll just ask them.
If they're difficult, I can think about them for a while. Think about the answer. But those bits where they're flattish, you don't want to go hammering along on those. Use those bits to go steady and just clock up some miles without feeling broken, because you will have to stretch the legs a bit on some of the climbs. And so that, understanding that, getting used to that, not being afraid of the steep bits, but just understanding what they're like, and that you can recover. You get up them, you go slowly, you can have a break halfway up. All that is absolutely fine. You'll see people walking up some of the climbs as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whatever it takes. There's no fixed way of doing the route. And it will suit if you're a heavier rider. You will bomb along those flatter stages pretty comfortably, and you'll probably have a train of 6, 7, 8 people tucked in behind you. But those men and women will find it harder on some of the climbs, and some of the smaller riders will zip up the climbs. But they can get your cup of tea ready when you get into base camp if you've towed them around some of the headwind stages.
And ultimately, if you're out there for longer, you're ultimately getting more experience for your money, aren't you?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
We had a question just come in around where the cutoff date is to enter the full ride across Britain. The cutoff date is later on next year, but it is worth saying that there will be a price rise on February 1st. So if you're thinking about entering, we would encourage you to enter in January. Similar, if there's a cutoff for entering, is there a cutoff really, Andy, for training for this? I mean, we've had a few people say it is now too late to start training if they're not already training.
So as I alluded to a minute ago, so much will depend on the the sporting background that person's got, and also what's how strong-willed someone is. I'll give a silly example. But we had a young lady who did the Tour de France route with us a couple of years ago, who I didn't give a prayer, and I told her to her face, but she managed to get around that, and that was more on sheer willpower. I wouldn't advise that for 1 minute. I did say a minute ago that if you prepare properly, then you'll enjoy the ride, and that's the key thing here. So the answer to the question is no, it's not too late, but I would advise anybody to get out as soon as they can and start getting the miles in. And you're not, this isn't a performance challenge per se. I talked a minute ago, it's not a bike race, so you don't have to become completely monk-like in your existence to succeed, but just to start to take on that sort of idea that eating and drinking and making sure you're just a little bit more careful. Perhaps it doesn't mean you've got to, as I say, become sort of abstain from having a good time, but you just got to sort of think about it in the round and make sure that you're considering it right the way through from now to when the event's on.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the holiday season soon upon us, there's obviously perhaps more time in people's calendars to be getting out for rides, but equally, athletes and cyclists and people like that, they can sometimes be a bit tough on themselves when it comes to enjoying and feasting and drinking or whatever else they're doing. So do you have any tips for people who may be taking on RAB next year and maybe feeling a bit anxious about the upcoming holidays? I mean, equally, I'm sure many cyclists have no issues in terms of letting loose.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think the key thing is that it's got to be fun. You've got to enjoy what you're doing, and that's, if it becomes a chore, then why are you doing it in the first place? So a couple of ways. People riding indoors, you should never go out if it's icy. I mean, that's the first thing to say. If there's ice on the road, then stay indoors, because you don't want to break a collarbone or worse by sliding off on the road. So that's the first top tip. But then the other thing I would say is try and find a group if you can. I mean, the forum that you guys run is excellent. Try and buddy up with a few riders, because if you know that you're committed, or a local cycling clubs are full of people that should have experience and knowledge. They ought to be. I choose my words carefully. They ought to be welcoming. They're not always. I appreciate. And if anyone needs any advice, then by all means get in touch, and I'm more than happy to try and steer people in the right direction. But if you've got a group ride going out, and that helps motivation hugely.
Yeah.
So I think that would be the thing I would be saying to people: find groups, be that virtual groups like we're doing here, which I think is brilliant. And I'm a convert now to this. I'm amazed at the graphics, and I've never been a big fan of indoor riding, but this is amazing. So that's the first bit in terms of a community aspect. But do the same thing out on the road. So clubs, groups, informal groups, buddying up with people. And making sure. I know that one of the chaperones, Steve Gregory, is Northwest based, and he regularly organises rides for riders from that area and in the lakes and stuff. And I think that just helps steer people. Other events as well. So the forum's a great place for people to buddy up.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll drop a link to the RAB Rider forum in the chat for anyone who wants to jump in and connect with some like-minded cyclists. I can see the gradients kicking up there, Nick. So now might be a good time to ask you to recite the Lord's Prayer, if that's possible.
Hit me. Got it.
But yeah, it is kicking into gear. We may touch upon that 17% gradient soon. Luckily, you're riding with a pretty decent looking pack there, so there's a bit of drafting going on.
Yeah.
Whilst Tups is huffing away, maybe, Andy, we can touch on other aspects of training through the winter, just in terms of kit. The roads can be a bit icier, potential for a bit of cold out there. Do you have any top kit recommendations for how to keep going through the winter?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about layering. I personally would always be wearing the legs covered at this time of year, for sure. I mean, there's an old pro sort of saying that, and I'm not so sure I necessarily agree with this bit, but if it's less than 20 degrees, your legs should be covered. That seems a little extreme, but you generally.
I'm assuming that's Fahrenheit, 20 degrees.
Warm muscles are much more efficient muscles. So don't go out, with your bare legs in the winter. Make sure you've got arm warmers or a good jacket at least. Make sure you've got layers, a buff around your neck, a rain jacket. If you stop because you punctured or you've had a mechanical, if it's been wet and you're wet, you're gonna get cold very quickly. And those are the sorts of things. Overshoes for your shoes, a cap under your helmet. There's a plethora of things that you can do to wear. But if people assume that waterproof means it is waterproof, you're never going to be completely waterproof on a bike, because the minute you put something on like a plastic cover, you'll perspire ridiculously underneath it. So you need a breathable membrane at least, and trying to keep water out from going up cuffs and down your neck and stuff is nigh on impossible. So staying warm and dry is the best way. Bikes, I mean, lots of people these days have one bike which they use for everything, but I would I'm old school. I would always have a winter bike, which has got a set of mud guards on it. So it's much more sociable with your mates if you're not spraying their faces with water. But we find people that ride with mud guards. You know, I've chosen the route specifically and been over it so many times. It's not real, but it's chosen because we've got this many riders. We don't want to be on the big A roads, obviously, but equally we're choosing some of the quieter roads where a heavier bike is sometimes much more beneficial and bigger tires. So getting used to riding your equipment through the winter in the harsh extremes means that you should be well placed should we get bad weather in September.
It feels like the kind of cycling world has kind of provided more suitable kit and equipment for RAB as well. Like back in 2012, it was all about Bradley Wiggins winning the Tour. You know, get your saddle as high as possible, the wheels as thin as possible, and lightweight as possible, and deeply uncomfortable. Whereas now, the kit's a little bit baggier, the bikes are a bit comfier. People aren't embarrassed to ride with a handlebar bag, saddle bags with waterproof kit in. That whole kind of bike packing trend coming through is great, because if 5-6 years ago, on the first day, people would turn up with their super carbon deep rim bikes, look very, very pleased with themselves, and some would turn up with an old steel bike laden with kind of old-fashioned leather attachments and stuff like that. There's one I remember I've seen before, which holds a bottle of red wine just underneath the top tube, which has always had a certain appeal. But after kind of the first rainstorm, day 3 or 4, everyone's envious of the more traditional, more comfortable kind of sociable bike than the super light, super fast, uncomfortable one. So embrace that, I think.
Yeah.
It's meant to be as enjoyable as possible, and there's some good kit out there.
Yeah, I'm the proud owner myself of a steel touring bike with a Brooks saddle, fully laden, probably weighs more than me. But I did the job with 0 punctures and zero saddle sores, which is was very welcome after the 2 weeks that it took me. So
Brilliant.
the bike, what's that phrase? The bike that you have is the best one to start with, basically. The one you've got. Is the bike. So obviously the number of bikes you need is always one more than you have. AJ has already completed this ride, by the way. He's left a review for us saying that was memorably horrid, which is a lovely description. Thanks, AJ. Appreciate that. And Mark, on the kit question, Mark has said a few good quality items are well worth it, more comfortable and last longer. So investing that bit more in a bit more expensive, but ultimately longer lasting kit.
Yeah,
I think that's a great shout. Whatever the brand is, but the quality is definitely going to make a difference, particularly in the shorts area. So making sure you've got a good quality chamois, and that needs to be worn next to your skin. Lots of people that are new to it don't understand that and wear underwear underneath, and of course that creates problems in itself. So practicing with your kit as well is vitally important, but good quality shorts is a must, I would say. And so that's a great tip from one of the riders there, for sure.
Yeah, I think it is quite a good time to shop around for that stuff. January sales, and also there's a lot of overstocking in the cycle industry at the moment, so worth having a dig around in the bargain bin and top up for the season.
We're saying no expenses spared on our virtual jerseys. These are premium bit of kit.
Yeah.
Nathan's asking if the cafe at the top is open. We'll let you know and grab
That's
a
one of the upsides of your cycling in your shed, is you can just walk into your kitchen and it's all pretty.
Not quite the same, is it?
Bit more washing up though.
Yeah. Briefly, let's touch upon hills, given that Tups is pretty much in the depths of the worst bit of the climb. Obviously, today's route is very much defined by a singular hill, but RAB in general, there are a few lumpy bits along the way. What would be sort of your best advice, Annie, just for preparing for those? I guess, obviously, physically getting out and riding them, but also just psychologically, as we touched upon, they can be a source of anxiety for people taking on the route.
100% right. 100% right. So the first couple of days, it's just up and down all the time. So they're just short, sharp climbs, and so it's really important in those situations to be able to pace yourself up those climbs. That might be getting out the saddle and what they call honking, weaving from side to side, getting on top of the gear. but generally there's a perception now that, you know, sitting in the saddle and having a spinning a lighter gear is more efficient. And that will come out from you know, the last sort of, I don't know, Lance Armstrong era, but basically that's kind of much more akin for these longer sort of climbs that you're going to get later on in the stages. The first 2 days, I say, are tough, short, sharp things all day long. The best way is to go out and practice on climbs, obviously, and it's more about the psychology of that than anything else. Here's the 17% bit, I think, isn't it?
There we go. 12% kicking up, yeah.
But it's really important that you are mentally, you know, the psychological aspect of this is that, you know, you can complete a 17% climb, for example. So going out and ride, it's a bit like riding 100 miles. You know, if you know you can ride 100 miles, you've done it once, you know, you'll do it again. And it's the same with climbing. I would always say, though, and people get bored of hearing me, particularly Tups, you know, some of the best climbers in the world come from Holland. And that's not renowned for being particularly hilly. So that then is, you know, goes back to indoor training and riding at intense levels when you're doing some of those interval sessions. So you can replicate the effort that you'd be putting in, but of course you're not going up a hill itself. So for me, it's a combination of getting a really good base to build the heart and lungs, then to start doing some strong interval work, sort of from end of March through to April and May. And getting out on the road and practicing on some of these climbs and just getting used to riding on the climbs. That'll be my top tips.
And is it worth talking a bit about some of the functionality on Rouvy, because we're talking about workouts and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Just briefly though, on training in the flat, we've had a couple of people commenting that they're in from Suffolk. So hopefully they'll find it reassuring that some of the best riders in the world from just across the water. I mean, as Tups is approaching the top of this climb, let's just quickly cover what's in the pipeline for the rest of the virtual Babble Ride Across Britain. This is very much kicking things off. So we're going to have a couple more group rides, and we're going to touch on some of the areas that have been raised. So the next one's going to be on the 10th of January, and it's going to be on a section of the route going through Bodmin Moor. So right from day one in Cornwall, a chance to get a taste for a very different kind of riding, the very crinkly, steep up and downs of Cornwall. And then 2 weeks after that, January 24th, we're going to be looking at a section from day 9, so completely the other end of the country, in Strathnaver Valley, which is in the far north of Scotland, and really an incredible landscape. That's not the landscape that's behind us on the virtual background, is it, Nick? Maybe?
No.
That might be.
Andy, you recognise that?
Oh, actually, I think it might be.
It looks sort of dreamlike, and
yeah. My favourite road ever in the world to ride my bike on. There you go.
Yeah, we've had some comments saying that was the best day, and it's certainly the most emotional with the finish line. But alongside those group rides, there's a couple of other things in the pipeline. So we're going to be releasing a series of workouts, a package of workouts that you can do on Rouvy. You can do these workouts on any route, so you could ride looking at this Glenshee route, but doing a workout that isn't tied to the elevation profile. And those are all designed to help you prepare for RAB. So whether it's building out some endurance, whether it's getting in some hill sessions, things like that, just to keep you going through the winter months. And some of them are mirroring the workouts suggested by Andy in his training plans, which are great. Then in February, we're going to be unveiling a full Babble Ride Across Britain virtual challenge. Now, this is still in development, but it's going to consist of multiple stages of Babble Ride Across Britain, a bit like we're doing today, stretching from Cornwall up to the top of Scotland. And if you complete all of those stages in the month of February, then a special prize awaits for you. But all that's to come over the coming months. But the main thing is, if you can come along on January 10th, we'll be visiting Bodmin Moor down in Cornwall, which is a bit of a longer section, I think, Nick. It's about 25 kilometers or so. I don't know if you're up for that.
Yeah. Well, see how we go. So I mean, we're trying to do a mix of different ones. So shorter, steeper ones like the Lect, some longer ones. You settle into that kind of steady state pacing. So yeah, whole idea is give a sample of all the different stages. Yeah,
absolutely. And I'm sure you'll be relieved to see that you've crested the top of the climb there.
Yeah, I remember the pit stop very clearly at the top here.
Yeah,
we had the team with a full pick and mix station. It was very much sheltering from the wind behind vehicles and stuff. It was absolutely extraordinary weather up here the last time.
Everyone is up. Yeah, everyone's made it.
With a tailwind coming out the valley behind you, which is the prevailing wind,
Yeah.
it can be absolutely amazing. You crest over the top. Got this incredible ride down towards Balmoral.
Yeah. And am I right? Is that mountain there on the left? Is that the Cairnwell, or is that?
Yes.
That
Yes,
is
it is. Yeah.
looking magnificent. And we can see just there on the left the ski centre. That's Glenshee Ski Centre, the oldest ski centre in Scotland.
There you go.
Well, we've all made it, and as Nick is pretty much bringing up the rear, it looks like most of the people are at the top of the climb.
Well, everyone's been drafting me going for a sprint to the finish. No, should have known. Should have known.
Well,
That'll be all the
fantastic.
chaperones back there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, massive thank you to our chaperones who've dialed in today to escort the pack up the climb. And thank you to everyone who's joined in. Oh, have I frozen? No, am I still here? All good.
I think one kind of final thing as well, and on some of these, on some of the group ride elements, is people can set their own ones up. So,
Yes.
We'll be doing these kind of relatively regularly, then we'll have the challenge in February. But this is something, if people get familiar with the platform, if you've got a group of mates or maybe a team, or you're all raising for cancer research or Macmillan, it's a great way of you just one of that group hopping on the forum, setting up a WhatsApp group and putting in a few informal rides, because it keeps you honest on your training when you don't feel like it, but you've got another group of people preparing for the same thing. Is really helpful to get that motivation going.
Absolutely. And it's worth mentioning that Rouvy does, like other virtual platforms, it does sync with Strava, and it does overlay the real route there. So the route that you've just ridden in Glenshee will appear on Strava as a virtual ride, which obviously if it's not on Strava, it doesn't count. So I'm sure a lot of people will be excited to learn that.
Yeah. Is at the time. So if you're kind of coming up and over the ski station, it can be kind of showing that you've been running -5 degrees and 50 mile an hour winds.
Yeah, it's interesting looking through our photo library and video library from the event and seeing the difference in people's clothing from the start of the climb to the top, where they're a good 300 meters higher than they were, and they've had to put on a few more layers.
Yeah. Great. Looks like we've got everyone in. The chaperones in at the back, Andy.
Yeah, no, everyone's good. I think that's been great. Some great comments as well. People obviously enjoyed that, so that's good to see.
Yeah, thanks everyone for dialing in, and looks like there's a cafe there, so I'm sure people will be enjoying some hospitality there. So yeah, thanks so much everyone. Thank you Nick and Andy for joining us today, and Nick particularly for powering away and maintaining conversation mid-climb. As I say, we'll have the next group ride on January 10th on Bodmin Moor, but before then obviously it's Christmas and New Year, so make sure you enjoy yourselves and enjoy your cycling over the holiday season. But thanks everyone for dialing in.
Thanks, Ed. Happy Christmas, everyone. Have a good
Cheers,
one.
Ed. Thanks, everybody.
Hello, everyone.